Howdy folks, welcome back. I think there's been a mistake. This is not a rusted out municipal plow truck or a crusty old farm tractor. It's a 2006 Cadillac XLR. She's in mint condition, 50,000 miles on the clock, detailed to the nines. And for some reason it's in my shop. So if you're not familiar with the Cadillac XLR, it's basically a Corvette. I believe the chassis is the same, has the same rear suspension, same transaxle setup, but it uses the Cadillac Northstar V8 engine instead of the whatever LS V8 you would find in a Corvette. And this one has a retractable hardtop. I don't know if they all have retractable hardtops or not. I actually didn't even know it was retractable. It looks just like a regular hardtop, but yeah, I guess it all folds up into the trunk or something. Alright, here's the list on this car. I think all the problems are problems that it had before they put it in storage for the winter, and then they just got it out, so it's only had a few miles on it since it's been out of storage. The check engine light comes on sometimes. It's actually not on right now, so we're going to look into that, see if it's got any history codes. The cooling fan sometimes runs all the time. And then most recently on the last drive he said that the low coolant light came on, and that was during the time that the fan was stuck on. I hope I have that right. And then the air conditioning needs to be charged. I guess the compressor has a little bit of a leak, and then, you know, sitting over winter it just loses all the freon. So we're going to charge that up, but these first three issues I'm a little bit more concerned about. I don't know if these have the same head gasket problems that the other Northstar engines had, the earlier ones like the 2000s. I think these are quite a bit better, but low coolant and the cooling fan running all the time has me a little bit concerned. Well, I hope you guys can read this. I don't have any kind of fancy screen recorder set up on the Autel here. This is an Autel MaxAssist 906 BT, by the way. A lot of guys ask about that. You can buy one of these for about $1,000, and I recommend it. It's been a very good scan tool. So it looks like most of the codes are going to be, there's a P0128 for the coolant temperature below what the PCM expects. And like each module is going to report back all these codes that get passed back and forth between the different modules. So you'll see the same thing repeated over and over again. So P0115 is telling us there's a problem in the engine cooling temperature sensor circuit. It's got a bunch of weird communication codes in here for the steering wheel module or something. Whatever. We're not going to worry about any of that crap. So the two that we care about is a P0128 and a P0115. So by the way, this is one of the hardest parts, I think, especially if you're kind of new to this, is figuring out which of these codes matters and which of these codes you can kind of ignore. And I don't have a great like silver bullet answer for that, but usually history codes that have been cleared aren't that big of a deal. And depending on how the monitors are set up, the thing will clear its own codes in a lot of cases. I mean, you look at this car and it's just an absolute mess of systems. So every single one of these is a system that can store its own codes. Engine control, engine cooling, engine electrical, TPS, HVAC, parking brake, cruise control, keyless entry, wipers. I mean, it just goes on and on, which is insane. Doesn't need all this crap. Anyway, let's worry about these two for right now. It's kind of running like a little bit crazy. It's probably just because the scan tool's plugged in. I notice that sometimes. It can make the engine idle strangely. Anyway, let's watch the engine coolant temperature and see what happens here. We've been running now for 14 minutes. We're only up to, 168 degrees. And this upper radiator hose is definitely warm. About 21 minutes in. Alright, we're 30 minutes in, up to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's almost 100 degrees Celsius. Anyway, I want to see if the fans run, and when the fans run, if they stay on or do anything kind of weird. I'm pretty sure we just have a bad thermostat, but I want to be sure. Alright, I don't know if you guys will be able to read this through the camera, but here's what it says for our P0128. So basically there's some enabling conditions here. It's got to be above idle, not in fuel cut more than half the time, blah blah blah. And it's going to run a monitor on a 500 millisecond loop under normal driving conditions. And that basically says that the computer thinks that the coolant temperature should be at least 195 degrees Fahrenheit, but the actual temperature that it's measured is less than 161 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of 10 seconds. Or the temperature hasn't reached 143 degrees Fahrenheit at all. It's going to set that code. And then I guess there's another one here, which must be like a one-trip code. And I don't know when it chooses which one, whatever, why they don't have two separate codes for this, but this one shows a one-trip code with some monitoring of the mass airflow sensor, and basically just means that it hasn't reached 176 degrees Fahrenheit, 80 degrees Celsius during that trip. So I feel pretty confident saying that this car has a bad thermostat, that the thermostat is sticking open and failing to reach the minimum operating temperature. I say we take this pig for a ride. I've got some data pulled up here. Let's see if we can reproduce the symptom of the fan sticking on. And yeah, this should be a pretty fun car to drive. We'll go live our life a quarter mile at a time. Alright, fantastic. The fan's just kicked on. So we've been driving for, I don't know, about 10 minutes. Still hasn't gotten above 150 degrees Fahrenheit. And the computer just turned on the fans. So that's what we wanted to see. And I'm tooling right along, you know, obeying the speed limit and all that jazz. So cool, we're able to reproduce the problem. Actually, this car rides surprisingly well. I'm very impressed. You would think by looking at it that it would ride like a skateboard, but it really doesn't ride bad at all. Alright, I just pulled off. You can definitely hear the fans running. The scan tool says they're going 83%. We've been driving for about 12 minutes. Has not gotten above 150 degrees Fahrenheit. But we probably should not take the gravel road. Though interestingly, the cluster now shows it at, well, it shows 100 degrees Fahrenheit, but the gauge is basically pegged out all the way at 0. But the live data still shows 150 degrees. So the cluster is still telling us basically 0 for temperature. The live data says still about 158. We've been driving, well, it's been running for almost 33 minutes. We have not gotten above 158. So that's pretty cool. We're able to 100% confirm the customer's complaint. I'm really glad this wasn't some kind of bizarre intermittent problem. Anyway, I'm gonna run inside and get some parts and we'll get this guy fixed right up. Pretty weird, huh, pup? Alright folks, this car needs a thermostat, and I feel extremely confident that just replacing the thermostat is going to solve all of these issues. So just to review, we have a P0128 code stored. That's engine coolant temperature below regulated temperature. The P0115 is some kind of generic code. I cannot find code setting criteria for that. It's actually not even listed as a DTC in the service information for this car, but it's some kind of a generic engine coolant temperature sensor circuit fault. We know from driving it that the temperature never exceeds 155 degrees Fahrenheit. This thing should be, you know, 190 plus. These things like to run pretty hot. We know that the cooling fans come on after, let's say, about 15 minutes of driving, and then they stay on basically until you turn the car off. And the gauge on the cluster shows that the temperature is basically, you know, at 100, or it's pegged all the way at its minimum value. So what's the deal? Why would the cooling fan run when the temperature is below, you know, the regulated temperature? It doesn't make any sense. Well, we have to understand how this cooling system works, and this is not your granddad's cooling system. So I'm going to explain how it works, at least my interpretation of how it works, and depending on your disposition, you're either going to say that's quite clever, or you're going to, you know, mutter under your breath about keeping it simple, stupid, and how this stuff's all way too complicated and prone to failure. Anyway, inside of the PCM, there's a couple things going on, but basically this orange line here is the actual feedback from the engine coolant temperature sensor. That's what it's seeing as an input to the PCM. And it's about 50 degrees Fahrenheit today, so about 10 degrees Celsius. So we start up the car, we run for about 15 minutes. After 15 minutes, it's reached, let's say, 140 Fahrenheit, somewhere in there, maybe about 65 degrees Celsius. I apologize if I don't get my Celsius conversions exactly right. I'm not as good with that one as I am with linear measurements. Anyway, now this pink line right here represents what the ECM has calculated the engine coolant temperature to be. And this is some kind of a proprietary blend of 11 herbs and spices, probably based on intake air temperature, vehicle speed, RPM, run time, throttle position, engine load. Who knows? Maybe even fuel trims. I have no idea how they calculate this thing. But basically the computer knows what engine coolant temperature it should expect to happen at any given time. And there's a monitor that runs, what was it, every 500 milliseconds or something like that. Anyway, so every once in a while the computer is going to compare its expected value to the actual value, and it's going to say, hey, do we have a problem? So what happens is these monitors run, and after enough of these conditions are met, the computer basically makes a judgment call, and it says, hey, we cannot trust the actual engine coolant temperature information that we're getting. It's too far off from what we're expecting to see at this given time. And I believe what's happening is it's setting this P0115 itself and switching off the gauge in the cluster. It's also turning on the cooling fans because it doesn't actually know what the coolant temperature is, so it's erring on the side of caution, and it's turning the fans on to protect the engine in case this number is actually a false reporting and that it's actually lower than what it is. So if the computer can't trust what the engine coolant temperature sensor is telling it, it assumes worst case scenario, that this thing is smoking hot and it needs to turn the fans on to try to cool the system off. So it's basically programmed to fail safe. You know, the PCM wants to protect the engine, doesn't want it to overheat, so it just turns the fans on to be safe. And I think that's pretty cool. And by the way, this is not confined to GM. Other manufacturers do the same thing. I know for sure that Audi will do this. I don't know, I haven't run into this problem on other cars, but I do know for sure that an Audi will do this, pretty much the exact same thing. So anyway, that's how it works. Kind of cool, I guess, or frustrating if you're on the other end of it. You know, and you could easily go down a rabbit hole with this, you know, chasing engine coolant temperature sensor circuits and, you know, fan driver modules and, you know, throwing a bunch of parts at it. A thermostat's going to fix this problem. I'm pretty confident about that. Unlike the junk I usually work on, we actually have to be kind of careful with this one, so I've gone ahead and prepped the patient. Well, I think we could do it with this upper radiator hose in place, but it would be a lot easier if we just take it out. So I'm going to take it out. Well, there's your problem, lady. The thermostat ate itself. It ain't gonna work like that. No, sir. Cool. I'm glad we found something. Makes me feel better. Well, you see what happened. It's got this rubber boot around the disc here. That's your valve, basically, that opens up. And the rubber has come apart. It looks like most of it's still there. It's just wadded up down here on the bottom. So I don't think we need to worry about a bunch of little pieces floating around. In fact, I'm not going to worry about it. We'll just replace it. But yeah, interesting failure. So our replacement does not have that rubber. Seems like quite a bit more robust design. Okay, thermostat housing is cleaned up. Got a new gasket, new thermostat. It's going to go in here like so. And then this whole thing's going to go there underneath the throttle body like that. I think we'll just get rid of this. Looks like it's just asking to get wound up in a serpentine belt. Maybe I'll clean that up and throw some electrical tape around it. That's better. Boy, they put this stuff everywhere, didn't they? I guess when you jam that much stuff in an engine bay. The one thing I've found with these constant tension clamps, if you can get them back exactly in the same spot where they came off, like the same orientation that they came off, they usually have the best chance of not leaking. Well, I see why the AC wasn't working. She's empty, bone dry. It's recovered 0. Well, 0.02. Anyway, ain't gonna work like that. The coolant doesn't look very good. Well, this green bucket is what I drained out of the car. This metal bucket here is what it should look like. It's Dex Cool, but it looks really rusty and cloudy, so I think we're getting some new coolant. Well, I don't know where that vacuum coolant refilling system's been my whole life, but that is pretty slick. I've only used it a handful of times, but it is awesome. I had to top it off just a hair, but it sucked all the coolant in that it needed and still had a little bit of vacuum left to go. That is fantastic. Very little mess. It's better than any other system for filling coolant that I've ever seen. Okay, we're going to go for a confirmation joyride, but we're looking pretty good. It's been running for... It ran for a few minutes before this, so probably about 5 minutes. We're already up to 156, so we're looking pretty good. Let's go beat on this thing for a little bit. Okay, folks, I think we got it. It's holding steady right at 190. Fan is off as it should be. Been running for what, 15 minutes. The gauge in the cluster is reading just fine. So I think we got her whipped. Looks like this upper radiator hose might have been leaking a little bit, but certainly not very bad. Looks good. Well, everything looks pretty good. Got the fancy pants cover put back on, topped off the coolant, the air conditioning works. I think we're done under here. Don't see anything that I've missed. All the hoses are hooked up, all the wires are hooked up. That's it. Alright folks, there you go. How to fix your 2006 Cadillac XLR when the cooling fans run all the time and the coolant temperature sensor makes no sense. I went ahead and cleared the codes out of it. We're going to ship this thing, get it out of here before anything bad happens to it, because it's way too nice to be around me. Anyway, I hope we get a good video out of this because it's a pretty cool problem. And I did not find anything in the service information that tells you that the PCM has this strategy to turn the fans on if it doesn't understand what's going on with the coolant temperature sensor. But I know that's the deal because I've seen this happen before. So that could easily throw you for a loop. And hopefully we get a video that can help people if they have the same problem. Alright guys, thanks for watching. This is actually a pretty cool car. And he told me that GM made, I guess, less than 11,000 of these XLRs. They're fairly rare. You know, a lot more rare than a Corvette. And I think he told me there's only 40 of them with this particular color combination, so that's kind of cool. But that's a double-edged sword. I don't know if you guys ever watched The Car Wizard, but he had a video about a Cadillac XLR, and I think it had a bad radiator. He was trying to find a radiator for it. I guess parts are hard to get for these, at least the parts that are specific to these cars. You know, the engine parts and parts that are, you know, common with a Corvette, not so hard, but apparently the actual unique XLR parts are kind of hard to get.